Hello everybody, welcome back to Comedian MTG. My name is Ian. We have a bit of a different episode here today. So what we're going to be doing in today's episode is I'm going to be covering one weekend where I played 3 tournaments, and as much as I would love to cover 3 top 16s in one video, I'm about to head to MagicCon in a few days in a different country, and that would be quite a lot to cover. I'm not really trying to cover 48 decks from multiple different top 16s, so instead I figured I would kind of go through my tournament experience for the weekend and talk about the things that were successful, the things that were unsuccessful, some of the highlights, some of the lowlights, and just sort of give you a weekend recap of my experience at the Siege cEDH 10K. And if you like videos like this or the top 16 recaps, make sure you hit that like button, that subscribe button, as they let YouTube know that you enjoy this content here, and it's free. If you're also interested, check out patreon.com/comedianmtg, where we got some really cool stuff on the way. Without any further ado, let's break down these 3 tournaments and my experience at each. Flying out to Colorado, I got invited to participate in the Siege cEDH 10K, which I was super happy to do. I know a lot of folks in the Colorado scene, and I was really excited for the opportunity to get out there. Just play some good cEDH, play some great games of Magic. So, funny enough, I arrive on Friday, and there are some friends who are DMing me, and they're like, hey, there is a 64-player warm-up gold event. And I figure I have literally never played my deck. I've not played a single game on my deck. We'll talk about my deck that I played for both this tournament and the main event in a second. And I was like, I maybe should get some reps in. And I go onto the website and it's like, hey, there's a 10-person wait list already for the 64-player event, right? This event was the Federal Heights Siege cEDH 10K LobbyCon tournament, the Battle at the Barracks. And so I'm like, dang, they've got a huge wait list. It is what it is. So in the meantime, I'm like, I'm gonna go hang out with my friend Parker, who lives in the area, and we're just hanging out throughout the course of the day. We go to a bunch of different game stores, just sort of shopping around, just hanging out around Colorado, and we just happen to go to this store that the event is being held at. And I walk in and I recognize a bunch of different players from just all over cEDH. I see people like Matt Hayes and Jason Doan and a bunch of other people, and I'm like, oh, is this the store that the event is at? That's kind of funny. And so I walk in and I'm like, well, I might as well see if they have the space. Once again, I have zero preparation on my deck. For a little bit of context on why I've had so little recovery time, this was a series of like back-to-back travel that I had through essentially the entirety of May into June, and so I didn't really have a lot of time to prep for a lot of these decks. I was kind of convinced last minute. You also may have seen I've collaborated on a video with Bite Size MTG where myself, Zach Adler of that channel, and Kaiser, who is a really solid Scion pilot and kind of like the godfather of Scion of the Ur-Dragon, we talk about my different version of the deck, their different versions of the deck, and sort of what makes Scion of the Ur-Dragon a very solid list. We'll talk about Scion in a second, but anyways, TLDR, I am at this tournament sort of by happenstance, and I'm like, hey, let's get some games in. I would love to feel prepared going into this tournament. And I also get a little superstitious sometimes. I'm like, oh man, I really hope I don't do well here and then do not so great in the main event. I didn't knock on enough wood. I played this Scion of the Ur-Dragon deck, which is a little bit different than some of the other ones that have been doing well. This is my list. I call a dragon who is not himself, but in fact another dragon. But I think this description really describes this deck quite eloquently, which is my dragon flies on wax wings. So this is probably closer to what a lot of people would be seeing for like a Nick Fury deck. Notably, I'm also not on Ancient Copper Dragon, which is like one of the dragons that a lot of people play when it comes to Scion. A big part of me building this version of the deck list was hopefully to get a bit of a surprise angle on folks, right? And essentially, in a deck that has some of these higher mana value dragons, I was still willing to play cards like Ad Nauseam, right? A lot of Scion lists nowadays will be playing things like Necropotence, but won't go nearly as deep into like the 5-color turbo category, which I was willing to go into for this deck. Ironically, as I've already sort of alluded to a whole bunch, it was really successful in concept in this warm-up tournament, and then, which is crazy too, because it's not like the warm-up tournament had a bunch of sleepers, right? Like, it was literally some of the best players in Colorado were all there for the 64-person gold event, right? And a lot of the really good players who were flying in from other places as well were also there participating, right? So it was a really, really stacked 64-person gold event. I ended up going 2-1-1. It was essentially a 4-round and just pay out top 16 because it was the Friday before the tournament, right? So this is where I ended up. I think because I submitted so late, that's why the deck list wasn't there, but it's the same deck list that I'm showing off on this other screen here and that I brought to the main event. A shout out partners of the channel, ToeMagic.com. ToeMagic has a crazy inventory of singles. They are one of the best vendors in the Magic space because they have the cards that you need. The reason it says Eternal lives here is because Eternal Magic cards, those foils that you need for these very specific cEDH decks, or the random cards that you need for your collection, the reserve list pieces, 99.9% of the time they're going to have them at ToeMagic.com. If you use code COMEDIAN, you can get a percentage off of your order. They've also sent me their events that they are going to be heading to in the near future. Here is the June and July run. If you order things online using code COMEDIAN, you can actually pick up at location if they have a booth at any of these events. They also have insanely fast shipping if none of these events are lining up for yourself as well. So check out ToeMagic.com. Once again, use code COMEDIAN to get a percentage off your order. The idea with this deck list was essentially it's a 5-color turbo shell that would be relatively commander agnostic, and then if I needed to play into a long game, we would get to do the stuff that makes Scion of the Ur Dragon really busted. Yeah, it's hard looking back on the weekend now because I still feel like a lot of the things with the deck were successful, and I was very proud of the deck. And so the main event was just frustrating. It was very frustrating. And we'll talk a little bit more in detail about that. But furthermore, I want to go into like the things that I liked about this deck list, the things that didn't work, etc. I think, you know, moving into the future, I probably would just play the traditional Scion package that a lot of people are looking at nowadays. So essentially you just take out the Adnaz in my deck and you put in an Ancient Copper Dragon and you put in a few more slower mid-rangier engines, things like flash photography, stuff like that, like what you would traditionally see in Kaiser's list, which is that sort of mid-range Scion list. And let me pull his list up so we can get a little bit of a comparison. So as you can see, it's only about 14 cards different, right? But there's the Ancient Copper Dragon, there's Bowmasters, a few more pieces of interaction, right? Being on Force of Negation, Red Blast, a few things like that, some more engines like Fairy Mastermind. Kaiser is also on crop rotation E-Zone to have another way to pay off with Necro. I was only on just the traditional ones, which are Final Fortune, Valley Flood Caller, and Born Upon a Wind. Crop rotation also very notably pays off really, really interestingly with Prismari, which we'll talk about here in a second. And then the differences you can see in my list here is like I was on more things that once again tried to sort of play without the commander. I was on Intuition, I was on Rograk in the 99, although I think between the main event and the side event, I did end up moving the Rograk out of the deck. I think I did make a few modifications to this deck list between when I thought I wasn't sure if I was going to play the Redemption event with Scion again. I did make 1 or 2 changes, but I had Rograk in the 99 of the deck list as well, and we can talk about that in a second. And I was playing, you know, Culling Ritual, Adnaz, Culling the Weak, right? A lot of these pieces to like put a win on the stack. Voice of Victory, because once again, trying to be more proactive, right? Much more the case of, right, it's 5-color turbo with Scion at the helm, right? Stifle actually had a couple different modes in particular that I was excited for. I didn't want to play Redirect Lightning because I was worried about the life totals because Adnaz, Necropotence, right? And I really wanted an answer for channel lands, right? So Beseiju, Otawara were definitely things that were coming up. And I will say Stifle actually did come up to save me in a game where we had to face down a Yuriko pilot and I was able to stifle a lethal trigger, which would have been really interesting. But I didn't get to see it a whole ton. The other part of it too is, as we can go back to this main deck, and you'll see here, is that this deck was like right on that line with blue spells, where we had 21 blue spells, right? And that's including Stifle. So for me, one of the reasons to get Stifle versus something like Redirect Lightning, apart from the life total thing, was the ability to have it for your Force of Wills, your Force of Negations, all that kind of stuff. Although I wasn't on Force of Negations, but like other pitch spells. For me, I'm on Misdirection instead, because Misdirection can be used a little bit more proactively versus Force of Negation, which only works if you're trying to win at instant speed, right? Once again, trying to go for that 5-color turbo approach. Also notably, a lot of other decks get away with playing Deflecting Swat for that sort of space for things things to deal with channel lands, right? We don't have access to that because, I mean, you could play those cards, but you have a 5-color dragon commander that involves casting it for hard Wooburg, so realistically, you're probably not going to get the ability to do that very often, right? Which is where Kaiser's List goes into a card like Redirect Lightning. That's where I was playing Stifle. So I was actually pretty happy with that like tech piece there. There's also some cute stuff you can do, like stifling a Final Fortune, or if you're playing against creature combo decks, like there are implications there for Stifle to actually be a real card. But yeah, I was able to go 2-1-1 on the day. The deck definitely gave me very consistent Necropotence lines, right? I didn't see Adnaz come up nearly as much as I was able to get early Necropotences, which makes sense, right? Necro is a lot easier to get onto the battlefield earlier on in the game. I did have one game where like being able to launch an Adnaz before my turn and then untap and go for a different breach line that came up and was actually really, really impactful over the course of the day. So like, I don't think it was fundamentally wrong to be looking at the Adnaz style deck, but I think if you want to really, really maximize what makes Scion a good deck in the modern metagame, it's not going to be this type of thing, right? It's not going to be going too deep onto the 5-color turbo type of aspect and giving more into the Scion plan, right? Very notably, right, Korvold is really great for if you have a bunch of treasure enablers, right? So Smothering Tithe, Stormkiln Artist, all those types of things. They turn your Scion into a Korvold for a turn, which allows you to crack, draw, make mana. Essentially, you have this really powerful mana and draw engine, right? So that's why Korvold is dragon number 1, and then Prismari was dragon number 2. Now, unfortunately, I was really, really not ready for how many people were very, very aware of how Prismari worked in the main event, which is funny too, because I've talked to people about Scion nowadays and at different locations and things like that. And I don't know if it was just like the opponents I was playing at the time, but like all of the Colorado meta was very aware of the Prismari lines and like what it could do, which was very funny. I don't know if they had maybe like just watched a deck tech on it or something, but they were like, oh yeah, he can go get Prismari here and do some crazy stuff. And I was like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, that is a known quantity at this point, right? Prismari was awesome throughout the course of the tournament. If you get an opportunity to mess around with this card in Scion, you're going to feel fantastic. The ability to just turn your Scion into a Prismari. I had a game where we were able to come to essentially like stopping a player on their turn because I was able to go like turn Scion into Prismari, cast a Cabal Ritual, and then made like 15 mana off of that, and then cast 4 copies of Tainted Pact. And the 4 copies of Tainted Pact, I wasn't able to win over the top because I didn't have any blue mana to hit a flash effect, but the 4 Tainted Pacts allowed me to like grab 4 pieces of free interaction and then go into my turn and try to win the game, right? So very, very powerful stuff there. And that's like kind of one of the worst cases I've heard of Prismari. The best case scenarios are when someone else is doing a crazy counterspell fight and you're like, all right, cool, you know, turn into Prismari, launch a Dark Ritual, make 12 black mana, cast Born Upon a Wind 6 times, right? Draw a bunch of cards, do a whole bunch of things. As I mentioned, the whole crop rotation package that Kaiser has access to in their deck, the ability to just sacrifice 1 land and then go and put a bunch of lands into play is pretty powerful. I think we can all sort of do the math on giving really powerful instants and sorcery Storm is fundamentally broken, right? There's a reason why the Storm scale is a thing. So Prismari is a very powerful toolbox to have access to in that case. Yeah, I was very excited with that part of the deck. I won a lot with Necro. Funny enough, and once again, I don't know if this was just the Colorado meta or like, it might have also been a culmination of like, I think that weekend was a combination of some of the grindiest games I've played in a very long time, combined with the fact that the slop meta game, so the archetypes that right now are doing Rhystic Study, copy Rhystic Study, playing cards like Flash Photography, copy Enchantment, Mirror Maid, all of these effects that just copy Rhystic Studies over and over again. That was the sloppiest heavy meta game I have maybe ever seen over the course of this weekend, right? I think my Necropotence was copied in literally every single game that I played it in, and I played it in a lot of games over 2 tournaments, right? It was kind of a wild experience to have a Necro get copied just dozens and dozens of times over the weekend. But that being said, I was really happy with the deck the night before, ending with 2 wins, 1 loss, 1 draw, feeling pretty confident ending the event in 5th place going into day 2, and into day 2 being the main event for the tournament. We got to give a shout out to F6. If you've been to any cEDH tournaments lately, you've probably seen their amazing booth. Let's jump to an ad for F6 right now.
F6 Supply is your one-stop shop for premium tournament accessories. From Benishoga playmats and high-quality dice to our custom token pack, F6 has everything you need to up your tournament game. Every design is original art, never AI. Shop online at shopf6.com or visit our booth at cEDH tournaments nationwide. Level up your game with F6 Supply.
If anyone has any individual questions on this deck list, I'm super happy to answer any questions y'all may have in the comments. But I think if you look at the lens of 5-color turbo with this idea of having this like mid-range dragon package as your backup lines, should explain a lot of like the questions here. But definitely super happy to talk about that with folks in the comments of this video. Moving on to the main event. So in the main event, the way it worked was it was 6 rounds of Swiss into a cut to the top 40, right? So we knew essentially you need like 12 or 13 points to make top 40 the next day. 6 rounds of Swiss one day, and then you jump into the main event the next day. So this is also wrong. It says I had 2 losses and 4 draws in this event. I had only a single loss. I handed up my slip in the last round of Swiss. That was my last round of Swiss was a draw. So essentially I ended the tournament with 1 loss and 4 draws, recognizing that I could not make top cut with 1 win, 1 loss, 4 draws, right? And so I went to go drop from the event at the time, ended in the slip with the drop bar X'd off, but we had been one of the last games in the tournament to finish, and so they just didn't drop me, which I thought was a little frustrating, but it at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter for anything, is what it is. So yeah, the day definitely, well, I guess I have 2 separate points for this. Point number 1 was, it was one of the coolest event spaces I have ever been in. The event was super professionally run. I had a really good tournament experience when it comes to walking in the room, having a really cool event space, feeling like there's a lot of stuff you can do in the space, had a lot of really cool vendors there. Stage was really awesome. I think everything about the logistics of this event were fantastic. They had a great team doing the stream. Like everything on that aspect was absolutely awesome. During the main event, I had a miserable experience playing a lot of games. There were some games that I had that were like, tough games. Everyone battled it out, but it was definitely one of the craziest, especially like on a social level, social experiences I've ever had in cEDH. As you could tell by the 4 draws, one of the things that kept happening was that I would be in situations in games, and I think this is unfortunately just a product of the meta right now, with a lot of these slop decks especially, right, where folks are just sandbagging like crazy and just not willing to put win attempts on the stack, and very good situations where they're willing to stop other players, but when it comes to like actually executing those wins and stuff like that, a lot of folks aren't pushing for their win attempts. And so I would have a lot of games where I'd be the only one trying to win the game, and it would just get stuck in a draw situation. That was tough. My only loss in Swiss was on the feature match. But then other rounds were just tough. I mean, like, there were some really good games that got played over the course of the tournament, and people put win attempts on the stack and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, we just got locked into draws. I definitely think, I don't know if it was a product of the meta at the time, but like, there was definitely a lot more aggressive politics than I was used to over the course of this tournament, which was kind of a bummer because, as I said, like, the environment was really, really awesome, and I met a lot of really fantastic people when I was out there. Yeah, people who were really willing to just do some like crazy levels of gaslighting in cEDH games that it verges on a very deep level of politics that I personally am not comfortable with. Happened a lot during the course of the tournament, and it was just kind of a bummer. I don't want to harp on that part of the event too much, but I definitely left this event pretty sad. Still happy with the deck list, which is the frustrating part I think about it too, right? I still think on a fundamental level the deck works, and I think the day before it's just one of those things where you run into variance. Congrats to all our pilots who made top 16 there. A lot of people played some good Magic to end up in this spot. So as anyone who's seen my last video saw, this is Josh, who made top 16 of this tournament and the Just Jam D-Grid event as well. And Josh and I have been talking about Tayam quite a lot. Josh is a Tayam main. He plays this deck very, very frequently. And yeah, we've been talking about Tayam for, I think since Land Goes Boil, where I was just playing some pickup games and he was like, hey, do you want to borrow Tayam? And it was one of those things where I was like, oh, hell yeah, I'm super down to play any sort of unconventional deck. And yeah, so I started playing Tayam, and then Josh and I kept bumping into each other at events, and I was like, wait, I'm actually having a lot of fun with this deck. And then, was able to learn some of the more intricate lines about his specific build and all that kind of stuff. And so when it came to the redemption event the next day, for those who don't know, a lot of these larger cEDH tournaments will have basically a day 2 event. Like, hey, if you don't make top cut, you can jump over to these redemption events and just have another event to play, right? A lot of people pay to travel to these events, might as well keep playing some Magic, right? So I said, the heck with it, I'm gonna go play Tayam. Let's have fun, and play this deck that I've been just sort of passively playing for months now, right? And I ended up making top 16, ended up in 9th place, the 2-2-1 record on the day. Felt pretty good. I lost in top 16 to Charles up on the Cabbage Merchant, who's been a player who's been absolutely killing it lately. Obviously, as you can see, he had a crazy day, going 4-1-1 on the day, only losing in the finals. And we played in a very crazy game where Charles and Joey, who's a Malcolm File Smasher player here, came to a deal in which they would essentially allow him to get a Glinthorn Buccaneer out and do enough damage to kill me and Max, who is on a control blue farm list. And yeah, that was a crazy game. It was one of the most intense, cool games of Magic I've played in a really, really long time. So shout out to all 3 of my opponents from that game. Yeah, I was able to make top 16 with Tayam and felt like, in that semifinals match, maybe like a decision point different, where essentially I had the option to lock Charles out with a Null Rod, but I felt like I might need him going into a different turn cycle with our opponents, and I was worried about them presenting wins, and so I didn't lock them out with the Null Rod, and I think that was probably the decision that cut me out of the game, that made it so I didn't win. But that's all hindsight 2020. It was a very nuanced and political board state at the time, and I was kind of convinced if I didn't have Cabbage Merchant help me out, I was not going to survive the turn cycle. All that being said, let's talk about Tayam, because yeah, this deck was absolutely a blast to play. And shout out partners of the channel, Heavy Play. Heavy Play continues to change the game when it comes to making the best products to protect your collection. Whether it's their super convenient magnetic dice tray system, their deck boxes, their playmats, all of it is so innovative and so unique. It is a system that I use in my personal collection all the time when I'm heading out to tournaments. I use Heavy Play products not only because I work with them and collaborate with them here on the channel, but because I believe in their products, right? This relationship came from me enjoying Heavy Play products and them saying, hey, do you want to work together? I am super happy to be partnering with Heavy Play. They make amazing products to keep your collection safe. So if you're interested, check out heavyplay.com/comedian to get 10% off of your order today. After walking out of the main event with just really dejected. And so I picked up Tayam and literally just poured it over one of Josh's most recent list. When I jumped into this tournament, we swapped like 1 or 2 cards around with some of the cards that were available, and I picked it up and I played it. And so I called the deck Safe Space. That was kind of based off a conversation that a lot of folks who had been seeing me play Tayam in a lot of these like pickup events or in LobbyCon and all that kind of stuff. Everyone was like, oh, Ian, kind of surprised to see you like going and doing the Dark Tayam thing. Like, what's making you do that, right? And I was like, oh, I actually started cEDH way back in the day playing stacks, right? And as a lot of people know, Winota is one of the things I'm known for, right? So like stacks decks, rule of law decks are my comfort space, right? That's why I call the deck safe space. Or for me, it's a return to form. Like I'm going back to my safe space. So yeah, that's how I got on Tayam. So we can talk about the deck list, what went well, what could be changed, all that kind of stuff. You're going to see little numbers here because on Moxfield, if you have redundant copies of things in your sideboard and in the main deck, they'll show up as highlighted here. And I did that to highlight all the cards that I'm like a little skeptical on moving forward with the deck and things that I'm probably going to change in my own personal build as this becomes a deck that is in my roster. And yeah, I legitimately really adored playing Tayam. This is genuinely one of the most fun tournament experiences I've had in years. I legit loved playing this deck, and it's definitely something I'm going to continue playing moving forward for sure. Obviously, I'm someone who jumps around from deck to deck to deck, so it's not going to be every single tournament, but yeah, I'm definitely Tayam pilled at the current moment. I've been talking with other Tayam pilots whenever I'm going to tournaments nowadays. I talk about this with Josh quite a lot. So like, this is a deck that is now a part of my roster for sure. And so what sold me on this one, right? Because like Tayam has been a deck I've been aware of for a really long time, right? But what I have found historically was that there was this sort of split in the Tayam community on like how they treated artifact hate, right? And so for a while, people weren't on Oof, and they weren't on Null Rod, and they weren't on Stony Silence. And what I really liked about Josh's list was that he was on all three of those effects, right? And that to me was like, if I'm going to play stacks pieces that are supposed to be hard silver bullets, I want to be on the most impactful pieces, right? So for me, that was these anti-artifact pieces, and it was rule of law effects, right? Like those were the two things that I figured would be able to handle most problems, right? There's also some other stacks pieces throughout the deck, right? Like there's classic, tutor hate with things like opposition agent, all that kind of stuff, and bowmasters, and I think there's traditionally an answer for most problems present in this deck list, right? So I was very excited about that aspect. I also really liked this idea that this was a deck that could break parity on Chains of Mephistopheles. If you haven't seen the flow chart on Chains, it's actually like a card that reads more complicated than it is. Essentially, if you're going to draw anytime that's not your draw step, right? So anytime that would trigger a Bowmaster, anytime that would trigger a Notion Thief, etc., right? Instead of just drawing, you actually rummage. So you discard first, then draw. And if you don't have something to discard, you instead just mill. In a Rhystic Mystic metagame, in a meta where people are just copying draw engines on copying draw engines on copying draw engines, Tayam's like, cool, I don't ever need a hand, and very often I don't want excessive card draw, so like just discard all these cards. At maximum, you're filtering your hand. At minimum, you're just losing card advantage repeatedly over and over again, right? So really like Chains for that type of thing. And it's a card I haven't been able to play in years. I also, as I mentioned, am super comfortable with Rule of Law effects, right? So this card deck's on Deafening Silence, it's on Aethersworn Canonist, Archon of Emeria, Eidolon of Rhetoric. It is on most of the creature Rule of Laws, and so I was a big fan of that. As I said, I played a lot of games on Rule of Law decks. It's a comfort space for me. I can operate under a Rule of Law with my eyes closed, right? And one of the nice things about Rule of Laws right now, and one of the reasons I am so Tayam pilled right now, was because, as I mentioned from the original day of the Siege, they were super grindy games, and everybody was doing the slop style game plan and all that kind of stuff. Now, in the Redemption, I do think like the meta was a little bit more diverse, right? But, or at least I wasn't running into as many slop decks. From what I was told from a lot of folks who attended the Siege, apparently I had a disproportionate amount of slop decks during the course of that first day. So, I could easily assume that I just low rolled pretty hard on the course of that tournament. But that being said, what I really like about these Rule of Law effects is they stop the very proactive deck. A Rogsai, a Ral, Itali, like all of those super fast turbo decks are not winning through a Rule of Law, right? They cannot win when they can only cast one spell per turn. And if they can win, it's through a number of very complicated means and removal and all that kind of stuff, right? So you stop them early. Then on the other end, it also does put wrench in the gears of a lot of these slop decks, right? Like you can only feed a Rhystic Study so many times when you can only cast one spell per turn, just sort of inherently. And then a lot of these decks are meant to have that high card velocity, which means that if they don't have the high card velocity to sustain, then they're looking at cards like Commandeer in their hand with only 2 blue cards and playing against a creature deck, right? Like, no one's going to Commandeer a Null Rod because they want it countered. It sort of attacked the meta on multiple different axes, which I found very, very cool. It's a deck where part of your game plan is just kind of vibing. It's a deck where a lot of the time success from this deck will come from passing the turn, right? Like, I will multiple times have multiple Tayam activations up and be like, sick, it's not my time to fight over these things now, right? Because you do play a sort of creature control style game plan. Yeah, you can tap out to activate Tayam a whole bunch on your turn, but realistically, that's very often a case where you find yourself over-committing. And instead, if you can find yourself in a scenario in which you're activating Tayam in response to things, maybe you don't know on someone else's turn you need to get your Ranger Captain back, right? But there are situations where, like, that's a super powerful synergy in the deck, right? I'm able to crack a Ranger Captain to stop somebody winning the game, and then, oh no, there's a Flash Valley Floodcaller, and they're trying to win over the top. Well, great, I can activate Tayam, put my Ranger Captain back, and activate once again, right? And I might not even be winning under this Ranger Captain. It's more so just the case where it's like, yeah, let's have these redundant pieces of protection. The idea that a Bowmasters can't shoot down your Oppo without having to wipe out the rest of your board to take out your other pieces, right? And this is a creature combo deck. You'd think that when I tell you I ran into like 5 Firestorms over the course of this Redemption event, that it means the deck would have been performing poorly, but that really wasn't the case, right? Like, I got hit by Firestorms in multiple matchups, and was still able to play resilient creatures, recover from those positions, and still be able to push my own agenda, push my own narrative with the deck. So was pretty impressed in that capacity as well. Okay, so there's a bunch of stuff here. If you're not a Tayam expert, I can totally understand being overwhelmed by a deck like this. What is this deck trying to do, I think is a really good follow-up question here. TLDR is you're trying to reach a critical mass where you can essentially just keep activating Tayam, right? Like that's essentially the end state that we're always trying to go towards, is infinite Tayam activations. Now, it's a little bit different because a lot of this deck isn't just like this card and this card go infinite GGs, right? Because you do need infinite counters and you do need infinite mana, or a loop that represents the ability to get counters and refresh them every time you would hypothetically go through, right? And it's, yeah, very, very often that there's not like actual like, oh, here's infinite counters. It's more like I can put myself in this type of position with a bunch of counters, and then that makes enough mana to create a loop here. Now, Josh's version, and the version I ended up playing, is known for what's called floating loops very often, which is essentially this aspect where you get some of these sacrifice creatures that also put counters on themselves, and creatures that can tap for mana with haste, right? Whether it's something like a Strangleroot Geist, which has haste and undying, which means when it comes in, it gets a vigilance counter, and then when it dies, it comes back, it gets a 1/1 counter and a vigilance counter, but then when you activate Tayam, it removes those counters, right? So like, for example, the card I just highlighted, Bloodflow Connoisseur, plus Strangleroot Geist, plus Tayam, is an infinite activation loop, because by the time that you sacrifice the Strangleroot, you've put a 1/1 counter on the Connoisseur, you've put a counter on the Strangleroot Geist, and you've put a vigilance counter on the Strangleroot Geist through Tayam's ability. So that's just 3 counters that you can just take off with Tayam. As long as you have 3 mana available, you're essentially getting per 3 mana infinite activation. And obviously, like as the deck goes on, there's easier ways to create that mana, right? So for example, if you have something like an Enduring Vitality out, right, Strangleroot Geist is now tapping for 2 of the mana available in that loop every single time, right? Because you're tapping it for 1, sacking it to the Connoisseur, it comes back, hasty, unsummoning stick, tap it for another 1, right? So through a bunch of different loops like that, that's kind of how the deck tends to win. I won a lot of games with Collar of the Claw, funny enough. So this one's really, really interesting. It says when it enters, create a 2/2 bear for each non-token creature put into your graveyard from the battlefield this turn. So realistically, very often you're doing the thing where you're activating Tayam and you're churning, and you have one of your sacrifice creatures. And Collar of the Claw, if you have an Earthcraft out, if you have an Enduring Vitality out, if you have, and obviously Enduring Vitality, Cryptolith, right, all those effects that allow you to tap for mana, you do need some sort of way to have haste on those effects as well. Rishkar is another card that does this as well, right? It gives each creature you control with any counter on them the ability to tap for green. If you have some sort of way to give haste, which the brand new Shang-Chi from Marvel I've mentioned in retrospect with Tayam very often, this is why that card comes in, because it's really good with this types of effects, right? But effectively, with Collar of the Claw, as long as 3 creatures you control have died this turn, you're then able to progressively make a bunch of bodies that can then tap for mana. And also with Tayam out, they're all getting vigilance counters. So essentially, as long as you can tap your bodies for mana, so through Earthcraft, through Rishkar with haste, through Enduring Vitality with haste, through Cryptolith with haste, right? Any of the above, as long as you can tap them for mana, you then have this loop where you're just infinitely making more and more bears, able to go through different Tayam activations. The easiest way to win with this deck is just have a sack outlet, have Bowmaster, activate Tayam over and over again, enter ping, enter ping, enter ping, enter ping, GG's, right? The other way to do it is through White Plume Adventurer. One of the dungeons in the initiative is this ability called Trap, which just says target player loses 5 life. Pretty straightforward. You just do that over and over again. Now, there is specifically one of the dungeons that says draw a card. And this is why the White Plume Adventurer is the backup loop and the Bowmaster loop is the first loop, because the draw a card function, you can actually respond to that trigger. So, moving into the dungeon creates the trigger that you can then respond to, right? So essentially, you're going through your loops, you allow all the deal 5 damage abilities to resolve, but then you hold priority on all of the draw card abilities, and you keep looping through with the White Plume Adventurer is essentially the TLDR, right? So looping Adventurer, looping Orcish Bowmaster is your main ways to win the game. The floating loops, like I just mentioned, also help, right? So that involves a lot of those cards that tap for mana. The other thing here with this deck too is that you can also enter a lot of loops with Gaia's Cradle, right? So Cradle being able to tap for a bunch of mana and then if you have ways to get counters back on your creatures, you don't even need to like have a mana efficient way to get those counters, because if you just sack Cradle, you can bring it back with Tayam later on and have a bunch of different Tayam Cradle loops that sort of work over and over again. That is why this version of the deck is on Squandered Resources. You're able to sack your Cradle to activate a bunch of stuff. That's why Sylvan Safekeeper is such a goated card in this deck, because not only does it protect your creatures, but also it's a repeated sacrifice for your guy's Cradle, so that turns into a combo piece over and over again, which is pretty sick. The other combo piece is, you know, everybody's most established combo piece from any deck ever, right, is Devoted Druid. Now, very notably in this deck, different Devoted Druid combos, because you can't do Swift Reconfiguration, because as soon as you would turn Devoted Druid back into a creature, it would die to state-based action. So what essentially happens is you want to create scenarios in which you make Devoted Druid larger than 4 toughness. Because if you can put up to 3 -1 counters on Devoted Druid, and if it's not summoning sick, you can essentially go tap for green mana, put a -1 counter on it, untap it, tap for green mana, untap, tap, untap, right? So essentially you'll end up with a state where you have 3 mana floating, 3 -1 counters on Devoted Druid, i.e., at that point, you can go, great, I have 3 mana, activate Tayam, take those -1 counters off the Devoted Druid, and here's a Tayam activation, right? Rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat, infinite Tayam activations. Now, how do we mainly pump the Devoted Druid? The main ways are 2 lands that are available in the deck. There is the Centaur Garden, which is a land that has Threshold and says you can activate to target your Devoted Druid, +3/+3. That's enough to make the combo work. And the other one is Hash Up Oasis, which is a sorcery, speed, desert that does the exact same thing. They each have their benefits, right? Hash Up Oasis doesn't need Threshold, but it can only be activated at sorcery speed. Centaur Garden can be activated at instant speed, but you need Threshold, right? So that's kind of the rough idea. So if you pump your Dev Druid, you have your Tayam on the board, boom, infinite Tayam activations. That's probably the cleanest, like, A+B feeling version of the deck list, and it does definitely put in some work. I think the biggest choke point I found with the deck was that I would be able to generate really, really powerful board states, but counters are almost always the choke point, right? You need to make sure you have the 1/1 counters or the vigilance counters or whatever it is on your creatures. And yeah, there's definitely a lot of ways to do that in the deck, but genuinely it feels like it's still hungry for more all the time when I play the list. And so that's definitely something I'm thinking about moving forward with the deck. Also, you may notice Basking Broodscale in here with no Rosy Cotton, no Longfang. Those are 2 pieces that go infinite with Broodscale and allow you to essentially make infinite Tayam activations. Josh didn't like those combos in the deck. Felt they were pretty unnecessary and kind of low card quality, right? Effectively, the last time we chatted about it, he was like, oh, they just didn't do anything. What I will say is that the Broodscale is just good enough on its own, right? Because if you pay 2 and activate its adaptability, it puts a 1/1 counter on the Broodscale, which then gives you an Eldrazi Scion. That Eldrazi Scion comes in, and Tayam goes, oh, creature came in, put a vigilance counter on it. So effectively, it's pay 2 mana, get 2 counters on your stuff, and then the Scion body can also sacrifice for a colorless mana later on, right? You have to remove the counters first before that part, but like, yeah, it can still, or it actually may not be. There's weird rulings with like removing the counters and paying mana to activate the abilities. I'd have to get that judge clarified a little bit, but TLDR is like, yeah, it helps you in that capacity where you're able to remove counters and essentially pay 2 mana to put counters, and at instant speed too, right? So the Broodscale actually just provides enough value on its own, so you don't necessarily need it to be super, super crazy. You'll notice there's a lot of land tutors in here. It's a Gaia's Cradle deck for sure, but there's also other land payoffs in the deck. The 2 combo pieces that we mentioned on the lands, there's Cradle, there's, you know, some anti Cradle hate for your opponents with Ghost Quarter here. We also have Gavany Township, which is a very, very impactful land. If you need a Gavany Township, trust me, it comes up and it will be very relevant. We're on Talon Gates of Madara, not for any weird Aboro combo style things, just because it's a nice control piece. And Tayam's always been like sort of a land heavy deck, right? You got 32 lands repped in this deck right now. So yeah, the last thing I'll sort of bring up is the cards that I was kind of underwhelmed by, right? And the cards I'm looking at cutting in the deck list. A lot of the stuff in here I really, really did enjoy. And as I mentioned, it's a deck I'm very happy with. Metastatic Evangel just kept coming up in scenarios where I was like, I would flip into it off of a Tayam ability and I wouldn't have the ability to bring 2 creatures into play. And so then I would be like, okay, well, I know if I have 2 activations, I can grab Metastatic, and then when another creature comes in, I'll proliferate all my counters and then I'll be able to start popping off, right? But then there were just situations where it would be the only counters available, and then I would have to take counters off to put another creature in, and by the time I got that engine moving, I wouldn't have a lot of things to proliferate anymore, right? So it's therefore like loses a lot of its appeal if like you're proliferating, but you don't have enough stuff to proliferate, right? Moving down to other permanents, Agatha's Soul Cauldron. I think Agatha's is a really powerful card. I thought it was a little weird in a deck that's playing Null Rod and Stony Silence and Collector Roof. It's a really powerful card. It does put counters on things, but to me, the upside was not worth the fact that it's textless in a lot of games. Same thing with Ashnod's Altar. Now, Ashnod's Altar is one of those cards that, like, if you talk about reasons to play the non-Collector Oof version of the deck lists, it's like Lion's Eye Diamond and Ashnod's Altar up there, because Ashnod's Altar is really, really good. The fact that you can sacrifice for 2 colorless and then you just need to get counters, right? Like that's 2 of the 3 mana you need per activation, and that stuff comes up. So Ashnod's Altar I genuinely do think is really powerful in the deck. I just, being on 3 oof effects, I'm good to not. Concordant Crossroads came up, kind of ruined a couple mulligans because I was playing against creature decks and was like, well, this Crossroads will kill me. As soon as I update the deck list, this is going to be a Shang-Chi. Replace 1 Haste Enabler for another, and 1 with major upside as opposed to major downside. Seal of Primordium I thought was fine. Obviously, we're in a metagame right now where blowing up artifacts and enchantments not a bad thing. I just think there are better versions of this card is kind of the conclusion I came to. I don't think it's a bad card at all. I just think I like other cards more that do the same mode. Survival of the Fittest is weird. I felt like I did not like this card a lot. Like very frequently it came up that I did not like Survival of the Fittest because if I had 3 mana, I didn't want to be playing Survival and activating Survival. I wanted to be doing other things. And then, yeah, I like this idea of like, okay, if you play Survival, then you discard a card, you're having repeated tutors, which is obviously super powerful. And then you're also getting cards out of your hand, which can be a real problem with the deck. Is like you're doing the Tayam thing, but then you draw a card that you really wanted to be flipping off of, right? Like felt like it logically made a lot of sense in the deck. And then every single game, and this is not just over the course of this tournament, this is literally every time I've played Tayam in the past year, I just have looked at Survival of the Fittest in my hand and never had the desire to play it, never found a space for it, never felt like it had made the cut. It's definitely on my chopping block because, yeah, it's surprisingly underwhelming. It just surprisingly does very, very little for us. And last low light was Ghost Quarter. Did not feel like a colorless land was worth it to be randomly strip mining other people. And also, if I'm going to be doing that, then I probably want to play like actual strip mine. I know Ghost Quarter can hit ourselves and go get our basics for Earthcraft, but that felt like a very, very cute use of the card and probably not worth it in my opinion. Cards I want to talk about as highlights. As I said, I really liked the Oof plan. White Plume was awesome. The combination of White Plume untapping a creature every turn and having a flipped Brigid came up for me multiple times over the course of this tournament, which was obviously insanely powerful to just untap effectively a Gaia's Cradle every single turn for your time activations. That one was pretty sweet. There's a lot of cards in here. Honestly, I could talk about the highlights and lowlights of every single card in this deck. I'm probably going to play Tayam again soon at a tournament, and I might have Josh come on the channel or some other Tayam pilots if they're interested, just to sort of have a modernizing of the 2026 Tayam sort of deck tech here on the channel, because yeah, for those who don't know, the Tayam deck tech that I recorded years and years ago with Pixel is one of the most popular videos on my channel, if not the most popular video. So it might be kind of nice to have an official like 2026 update with the deck. I kind of want to, yeah, maybe we'll see if we can find like a Tayam summit or whatever for folks who enjoy this deck. But yeah, this has been my summarization of the weekend. It was like a good tournament sandwich where I had a really positive experience and was able to perform well in the first event I played this weekend, the Federal Heights event. Second event I played in the weekend was the 10K, and it was a tournament that I left frustrated, and then had a really just rewarding and rejuvenating experience in the Redemption event, which was really, really cool. Yeah, I'm definitely interested to hear folks' thoughts on the 2 deck lists, any questions on Tayam or Scion or anything like that, and if folks are interested in me finding time to have sort of like a Tayam summit with a bunch of the Tayam pilots, something people would be interested in. So thank you all so much for watching this video. Really appreciate it. If you like videos like this, make sure to hit that like button, that subscribe button. They help out the channel a whole ton. And without any further ado, I will catch you all next time. Peace.
I can feel the blood creeping up from the heathens. Got will, got fight, got pride, got reason. If they wanna go eat, then you know I'm gon' feed 'em. If you're coming for me, hope you're ready for a demon. I got eyes in the back of my head, I'm seeing. Take me for granted and you know I'm leaving. I'ma take what's mine with the webs I'm weaving. I could take this crowd from seeing to believing. Got a